Hi there, in this first video I'm going to talk about information. I'm going to talk about explain information the way people generally think of information, and then I'm going to talk about information in the way that I think it should be thought about. Traditionally, people think, when people are talking about perception and things like that, they say that the environment has information in it and it is somehow absorbed or taken in by an entity, and then it's interpreted and understood in some way, and then the object that's observed it can then behave accordingly according to that information that it's derived from the environment. This to me is an error, thinking of information like this. Another way of thinking of this view is, say this is our entity. The environment has information in it, lots of different types of information, and a piece of that information comes into contact with it, and it takes that, interprets it for what the information is, or what how it's relevant to it. How it knows what is relevant to it is always a mystery, but somehow it interprets that and incorporates that, then it behaves accordingly, and it can offload that information into the environment again. Problem with that view is that you have to explain how this entity knows how to interpret the environment, how it knows to interpret the information that is out there, because there's nothing inherently informational about the environment. So you have to have some idea of what the interpreter is, and this is always a problem for this view of information. Now, my alternative view is to aligns itself with Newton's laws of motion. So what we have is two separate entities in the environment, and Newton's law says that when they interact, there's an equal and opposite reaction. Okay. So what we're in effect having is an exchange between the two of information which tells them how they're going to react to each other. Okay, there's no speaking obviously, but somehow that interaction informs them of one another. So what you get from interaction is two bodies that become informed of their differential. They were once different isolated bodies, and they are informed by one another, and they go off in the manner that they go off after that exchange. Okay, so that is how in the environment there is an exchange, and two interacting bodies become informed by one another, and there's not any inherent information in that exchange, but by virtue of that interaction there must be something going on, otherwise there is no interaction. Now, in nature there are the fundamental forces of attractive forces. So if somehow they maintain their proximity or their relation to one another, then that becomes what I call a construct of parts that are informed by the interaction that brought them to that initially was generated by the interaction. So we have then a more complex and informed construct that is informed by virtue of the interaction that took place. Okay. Now what we have then, we have a more complex body which again interacts with elements of the environment, and that interaction informs both parties involved, and there are certain consequences. One of the consequences might be, for example, that it causes the disintegration of one or both or part of the interactive bodies. But what in effect we get is the evolution of complex informed constructs. Okay, we don't have to understand the nature of those interactions. We don't have to understand what is evolving in terms of complexity. What we can say though is that there is the evolution of diversity and complexity, and this all relates in a way to the Newtonian laws of motion. But having said that, whilst the Newtonian laws of motion speak of this in terms of mass and velocity, what our entities are not, we don't have to think of them in terms of objects of mass and velocity. We can think of them as any construct that might exist in the universe. So one way that I think of this construct is a construction of concepts. So in my mind there is a construction of concepts about the nature of reality, and when the environment interacts with my constructs, when I observe the world, when I speak with other people, or when I read, though that construct about the world is impacted through the interactions with other concepts, and that evolves the body of the constructs that constitute my mind, my realization about the world. So you can see in this understanding of information that when we're talking about colliding bodies, we're not talking necessarily of objective bodies of mass, of matter, but we can think of it in terms of more abstract bodies, if you like. And this is how we incorporate the idea of the third law, Newton's third law, and the increasing complexities of interactive entities that generate informed constructs. This is how we incorporate this into the idea of constructs relating to consciousness, abstract understandings of the constructs of consciousness, qualitative nature of consciousness, and the more introspective nature of consciousness, which I think of in terms of our concepts about the qualitative nature of reality.